I know. Yeah. You have to get that out of here. The preview. Oh, so you do have a truck. What? I do know. I can imagine. I would hate that.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit of logistics here before we dive into finals discussions. And forgive me for sitting down. It's been a long flipping day. And I'll get
late after you walk.
Okay. I'll get animated. I'll get animated by the time the day's over. So I wanted to walk through a few things logistically before we kind of go through the before we go through questions and stuff. So first things first. I had two of you. I don't mention names because it's not the right thing to do. So please God, I need to pass this class. And then please God, can you give me a little bit more time on a couple of these assignments, because I want to redo them again because I didn't quite do as well as I had hoped on the first couple assignments. So I've done the following. I've taken the assignments that were due earlier and put them all due close of business tomorrow, so you can retake anything that you want to retake, with the exception of the midterm, which I stretched out to this coming Friday. So any of you online as well, you guys have a little bit more time if you want to retake it. Some of y'all are water walking this course, and you're running straight A's, and that's wonderful, and you're doing everything that's asked of you, and I appreciate that. But this course is really hard. It's one of the harder business courses you're going to end up taking, and you're doing it in a compressed, blended online format, which is not an easy format, and I recognize that. And as I'm looking at kind of the distribution of grades, and again, there's 7 folks in the class between the folks online and the folks in here. It's bimodal. I've got folks that are straight A's. I have folks that are going, oh my God, can I please pass the class? Okay, so I want to make sure that we can try and bring these folks up. So I'm giving a little bit more time. The second thing is the final. When we go through the final next week, that's going to be covering the entire thing, soup to nuts. I'm going to walk you through part of the final today. I'm going to walk you through what we're going to be looking at. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. I'm going to let you take a look at a couple of the final problems so that you got an idea of what you're going to be walking into, so that you don't freak out. I'm going to guarantee y'all that if you showed up to class, if you did all the quizzes and you took them 3-4 times and you got up into the 70s and 80s on the quizzes, you did the midterm and you did it twice and you improved, and you take the final and you put forth a good effort on the final, you ain't going to fail the class. You might not walk out of here with an A, but you ain't going to fail the class. Ain't going to fail the class. So you don't need to worry about a passing grade if you put the effort in. I promised you that the first night, and I'm standing by that. The final will end up with a curve on it. And I think, as I told you all last time, the final grade for the last, when we took the finals for the last class, I had somebody in class get 100 on the final. That was a high grade. They aced the final. I had somebody get a 29 on the final. So the final's not easy. The final you guys are getting is basically the same final as was given last spring. It's about time management. At the end of the day, the person who got a 29, we curved them up to a C minus and then adjusted everybody else's grades accordingly. So because that person busted their tail during the course of the semester, did all the quizzes, did them multiple times if they didn't get good grades, were here pretty much every class and did everything that was asked of them, I looked at that and said, you've done at least C minus work. Even if, because you may have test anxiety, you may have had a bad day, you may have felt sick. I don't, there's a myriad of reasons why you might not do well on one single test. But if you've kind of consistently tried to perform, you'll do okay. You'll pass the class. So I know there's a couple of you who are getting a little bit nervous about, oh my God, am I going to pass the class? Just punch it through. You're 2 weeks out. You're going to do well. You'll do fine. You'll pass the class. You just got to put the effort in. So having said that, you've got another 24 hours on all the quizzes to be able to get those things in if you haven't gotten them in. I got a couple folks got cut off or cut out of the quizzes. The midterm you've got till Friday. The midterm's a good practice on the math pieces for the final. But it's not, by kind of going through those quizzes one more time, even if you did well on them, remember I take the highest grade. Going through those quizzes one more time, doing the midterm one more time, if you didn't do it the 2 times, is not going to be a bad way to study for the final, but the final's not the multiple choice format. So we're going to walk through some of that. Any questions on this assignment calendar and such? And again, for those of you who've done everything up to date, up to speed, up to time, that's going to be reflected in your participation grade as well as your regular grade, because you guys know that you're doing really well. For everybody else, our job is to try and help our brothers and sisters through the course, and that's what we're going to do. So that's the class, the kind of the logistics piece. I want to talk a little bit about 2 things. Maria had asked us to talk about, or at least answer questions about, the extra credit assignments. So what questions do you have?
I did have some questions, but I'm reading it again so I can remember what the questions are. Sorry.
Okay, while Maria's reading it again, let me talk a little bit about the extra credit assignments. The extra credit assignments will be added to your grade on the midterm, on the final after the curve has been applied. If you ended up acing the midterm, or acing the final, I'll then apply the extra credit to the midterm. So for instance, in my last section last spring, I had one person do the extra credit assignments and ace the final. So I applied it to their midterm exams to the extent they had extra credit points available. I applied it then to the lowest quiz to the extent, so you're not going to lose those points. And I'll apply them to other things so that you're not going to get 120% on something. You'll max points, and then I'll apply it somewhere else and make sure that those points don't get lost. The extra credit is due to me Friday the 5th. Is it Friday the 5th? Friday the 8th, I think. Next week is Monday is the 5th. Right? Yeah, Monday is the 5th. So the 9th is Friday. They're due to me Friday. And the reason I do that is this. If you took the final and you walk out of the final going, that thing just kicked my rear, it gives you 4 days to pound out a relatively quick couple papers of like 4 pages in total and boost your grade by a fair bit. If you said, okay, I think I did really well on the final, and I know I've done really well on the quizzes and midterms, and those extra credit assignments aren't going to do me any good, you can make that assessment after the final exam. But I'm not going to sit here and go grade cutoff is as of Monday night next week. I'll give you up until Friday, basically Friday close of business. I have to have grades in Monday. So Friday close of business. If you're sitting there going, God, I'm not feeling really good about where I'm at, you're going to have 4 days essentially to pick up an extra 15 points, because it's not one or the other. You can do both. So it's relatively easy. Again, when you look at it, the second one should be a minimum of 1 and no longer than 2 pages in length. Okay, well, that should take you about an hour. And that's a contemporary review. Financial analysis. I'm going to sit here and tell you right now, if you do number 1 before the final, that's going to be a better, and you'll see why, that's going to be a better practice for you going into the final than doing all quizzes and stuff over again. As a matter of fact, if I were you, I'm not, but if I were, I sent you an email that said, here's a publicly traded company that's going to be your final exam, PACCAR, 2015 financial statements. Right? Y'all get that email over the weekend?
That was one of my questions too, was can we do it on PACCAR?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
If I were you, I probably would, because I'd be like, oh, wow, I could actually take a little bit of time before the final, do the paper on it, get 10 points toward the final, and actually be familiar with the company, be familiar with the financial statements, and have done some of the analysis going into the final exam. So if it were me, I would use the 2015 PACCAR financial statements and do number 1 as part of my study prep for the final, which was part of where I was headed to begin with tonight. You've got a relatively easy opportunity to pick up 15 freebies here. Like I said, if you do really well on the final, I'll apply those 15 freebies elsewhere. It'll be after the curves apply. So I'll look at everybody's grade, apply the curve, and then I'll add the points. The reason I do that way is so that the points don't skew the curve too high, because my bottom or top person ended up with bonus points. So I'll curve first, then add points. But these are 2 relatively easy ways to pick up points. And like I said, I'd be picking up that first one with the PACCAR 2015 financials. Going, 2 to 3 pages, inclusive of any spreadsheets. Spreadsheets will be submitted electronically. And it's going to be the, should I invest, should I not invest, and do a bunch of ratio analysis around it. Any questions on those?
Yeah, for the first one, do you want us to keep out references to the book? Because the second one, you specifically say AP days. Yeah,
the second one, the first one, you're likely, if you have outside references, you should reference those.
Right.
But this is really a financial analysis, and so it's using ratios. You can reference the book, but there's no explicit source. Mm-hmm. Here, because it's going to be The Economist or a different periodical, I need to understand where that source was, so that way I can go kind of sneak back in and validate what you're looking at.
And then is it all or nothing? Like either you get 10 points, you get 10 points.
No. I think last. Again, I had a couple superstar folks at max point and everything, plus got bonus points. But I think probably half the class did the second one, and the points ranged from 2 to 5. And on the first one, surprisingly, probably only a quarter of the class did the first one, and the points ranged from 5 to 10. So you'll get, if you put a modicum of effort in, you get at least half credit. But I candidly, Maria, I was shocked because I had almost the same conversation a week prior to the final, and only had a quarter of the folks do the first one with PACCAR as a choice. So I'm telling you, so to me, that's an important, that's a good one to do. What other questions on those of you who are in the military know that part during instruction? That's right, that's going to be fine. What other questions on this piece before I dive into some final exam prep? If you guys have questions, quiz questions, test questions, most of you haven't been too shy, just hit me up by email. I want to make sure you're ready to go for next week. And like I said, because there's no follow-on class in here, I'm going to push it out to 4 hours to give you a better chance to finish. So we'll finish up next week at 9, and I'll walk you through what that's going to look like. So let's move over to a little bit of final exam talk. Okay, let's take a quick look at the PACCAR annual report. I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks because this is, as you can tell, 98 pages of fun. So there's a few things that I would tend to do up front in order to make my life easier going into next week. The first thing I would do is I'd make sure this puppy is at least downloaded to your desktop, if not printed out in hard copy. If it's me, I'm old-fashioned. I like stuff in hard copy because I like to scribble on it. I like to put little tabs in it. I like to do all that good stuff. You know, your mileage may vary as to how you want to do it, but I would at least have the thing copied down to your desktop. Because if you have problems getting internet connectivity in here next week, or you have problems with, you know, any X, Y, or Z technology problem, I don't have copies of PACCAR to hand out. And I'm not going to print, 500 pages of fun. And so at a minimum, I drop this thing down to your desktop. The PACCAR annual report, there's components of the PACCAR annual report that are going to be really important for you to absorb. And there's going to be portions of it that are kind of fluffy. There's elements within the annual report that I would tab, or that I would make sure I knew where to find them. This is some interesting financial highlights. You're going to find a couple pieces of useful data in here, but this isn't where the meat and potatoes of what you're going to be looking for on a final are. I'll show you where the meat and potatoes are going to be. It's not going to be in this propaganda letter written by Mark Piggott. It's not going to be looking at trucks and things like that and hearing how superb they are. See, superb. Nope. You may find it interesting to read about PACCAR because most of us don't realize that the parent company of Kenworth is in Bellevue, Washington. So one of the largest truck manufacturers in the world is headquartered in Bellevue, Washington, which is why I chose PACCAR, because BAF is built in Europe. I think it's in the Netherlands, Australia. So here's some things you can pick out. If you read this first section, there's a few things you can kind of take away. And again, I would skim it. I wouldn't try and memorize it. I wouldn't get a highlighter out and and highlight every little thing, there's a few things I'd take away. First, PACCAR is an international company. So you may have things like currency exchange rates to think about. The second thing is PACCAR is a manufacturing company. So when you're looking at PACCAR as a company and you're looking at major items that they need to be able to finance, things like inventory are important. It's a big number. There's components around PACCAR where they may do financing for their customers. And so they've got a financing arm. So they borrow money and they lend money. So in some ways they act like a bank. So there's going to be components around risk and return associated with those borrowings. So what this first section is going to do, if you skim the first, and we're already to page 22 and we haven't gotten any real numbers yet, but we've got a lot of pictures of trucks. What you're going to get a feel for in the first 30 pages or so is really, I'll stop here, is really a hint at what PACCAR does and what they've been doing. You're going to be able to take away their major business segments. So their international business segments, their truck manufacturing components, their accessory manufacturing components, their financing components. You go, okay, I've got a couple things I need to think about when I'm getting asked these finance questions. The other thing you're going to see is PACCAR's had a little bit of an up and down. They discuss that in some of that management discussion and analysis, and you can see some of it here when you look at their market share, rolling average, and percentages. You can see that their market share, for instance, went up and it started to decline, went up and it started to decline in Western Europe and in the US and Canada. You can see things around the growth of their assets. How much of that is in financial services? How much of that is in manufacturing? Is PACCAR more of a bank or more of a manufacturer now? So when you're doing the analysis, which is likely to be found in your final exam, some analysis, you can go, hey, there's a significant amount of their assets are in this financial services bucket. They're probably got a bigger exposure to financial services and interest rate risk and some things like banking than they do as a manufacturer. Geographic revenue, you can see that the United States makes up a majority of their revenue, and that's growing over time, or has grown over time. And so their growth opportunities outside the U.S. have declined a little bit, have been relatively steady at about 7.5 million, have declined a little bit. The other thing is in 2009, they had a really bad year, 2010, a bad year. What happened in 2008? Recession, financial crisis. So you had the financial crisis come down and then it starts building back up. Notice what happened to their financial assets at the same time. How much of an impact did that have on their performance? Those are things that when you're looking at this, when you see some of the questions, and we'll take a sneak peek at a couple of the questions. When you take a look at some of the questions, these are areas where you might be able to pull some nuggets out and go, hey, the company looks like more of a finance company than a manufacturer, at least half and half. And so during the 2008 financial crisis, it got impacted significantly, both in terms of its total assets. So assets went down. Why? Inventories went down, perhaps. And also in terms of financial services, it went down. Why? Well, you had a combination of write-offs and less sales. And now that they're on the upswing for reason X, Y, and Z, and that growth is occurring predominantly in the United States, we're starting to see improved financial performance. There's a whole segment on the final where basically you take those nuggets out and you put them on paper. You don't need to calculate squat. You need to just read these graphs and take a look at the management discussion analysis, pull out some of that data, and be able to convey the fact that PACCAR is a good investment or not a good investment, and why. Well, here's some reasons why it might be a good investment, or why it might be not a good investment, or why you think you're investing in a manufacturer, but you're really investing in a financial services company with a manufacturing arm. You can see stockholder returns. This graph might be useful. It's on page 27. You can see the performance of PACCAR relative to the S&P 500, relative to its peer index, relative to its prior peer index. Why did the peer index change? It's a good question. S&P 500, so has this been a good investment since 2010 or not?
Yeah.
So $100 invested in PACCAR in 2010 would be worth $98.14.
Oh, they said SP 500.
Oh, the S&P 500, yeah, it's on its
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
In PACCAR in comparison, the S&P 500 has underperformed. Why? Can you take a look at various components of PACCAR's financial performance and explain why it might have underperformed?
Because it did really good until 2014. Sometime.
Well, they were acting like a bank and gave out a bunch of loans, and then something happened, and those loans were to default, and so that was affected. Right?
That would, but why would that? What happened in 2015 that caused, they were basically moving in the same direction.
Oh,
Now you see there's this,
right.
The S&P went up a little bit and PACCAR fell by a significant portion. So there may be a question like, what happened?
Is it a written explanation then in the report?
It's part of that MD&A is management discussion and analysis is going to have that. So here's the management discussion analysis. You're going to see that they talk about weaker foreign currencies, particularly the euro to the US dollar, as being something that's offsetting its growth in overseas. So there's things that you're going to be able to pick up here. And what I'm looking for is that you guys are grappling with it. There's going to be no perfect right or wrong answer, because a lot of this is you taking the data that's available and going, okay, I'm grappling with the data. I'm showing that I'm reading the stuff. I recognize that it's important. I'm recognizing that it has an impact on stock price. I'm providing a hypothesis as to why it's having an impact on stock price. In this particular case, they're kind of spelling out, net income went up from 14 to 15. It's aftermarket parts and financial services results, record freight demand, earnings per share went from $3.82 to $4.51, but they're having problems with weaker foreign currencies, particularly the euro relative to the US dollar in Europe. And you're going to be able to take a look at, there's a lot of discussion and analysis. You're going to be able to look at things like outlook. Because remember, in finance, we're always going, the current stock price is a reflection of expected future cash flows discounted at a discount rate, right? The discount rate's a reflection of the risk associated with the underlying cash flows. And so when you look at their outlook, they're going, okay, parts are expected to increase 3 to 5%. Truck retail sales, well, they're looking like they're going to be down a little bit. So if you look at this MD&A, you look at truck outlook, it goes, okay, truck sales in 16 are expected to be between 230 and 260. Remember, strong growth in the U.S. has been the area where they've identified kind of their growth, recent growth. Last year was 278, 400. So they're going, okay, growth there is going to be down. Europe, over 16-ton vehicles, 260,000, 290,000 units, which is about flat to this last year. South America is about flat to this last year. So all of a sudden you're going, okay, we're seeing demand is actually for our trucks is decreasing overall. It's flat in two major markets. It's down in another. And when you look at Europe, one of the things they said was one of our challenges is the foreign currency conversion rate, right? So that's impacting profitability in Europe. So now you're starting to go, okay, well, maybe the stock price is going down, not because of performance that we've already seen, because the performance we saw in 2015 is fairly good, but maybe the expected performance in 2016 is going to be lower. Parts outlook, 3 to 5% increase. Well, what's the dividend growth rate say? What is the expected return? What growth rate is required? And so if the growth rate that equity holders are looking for is 8% or 9%, and it's only growing 3 to 5% on parts, and you're seeing negative growth in trucks. Now all of a sudden you're going, okay, this is starting to, now I'm starting to explain why you're seeing that split in performance. Financial services outlook are expected to be comparable with 2015. And then you've got if freight and transportation conditions decline due to weaker economic conditions and past due accounts, truck repossessions and credit losses will likely increase from current low levels and new business volumes will likely decline. So there's a lot of things that you can pull out of the management discussion and analysis that will help you with the actual analysis that's going to be asked of you on the final. Now we're getting into the point where you probably need to start paying attention to the real numbers. You've got items here like income taxes, investment income, financial services income, truck parts and other income, net income. So this is by segment. You can see there's segment reporting. So the SEC requires when a company has major segments to its business, so different businesses all buried within the same company, that they now break out the performance of each of those segments separately. And so what you'll see here is a look at trucks, for instance. Trucks are going to be broken out separately. You'll see that not only did they expect Europe to be flat, but it declined year over year from 14 to 15. Not only did they say Mexico, South America, and other would be flat, but it's declined 22% from 14 to 15. US and Canada was the growth area. It was a small growth on a big number, and that's where they're expecting they're expecting declines here. So you're going to see declines across the entire segment of trucks, potentially, and a pre-tax return on revenues is important because your pre-tax return is actually your operating leverage. So when you go back to things like the DuPont analysis or the DuPont equation, you've got this, you can see that this going up a little bit made that rise quite a bit. This going down a little bit is going to make that fall relatively rapidly. And if your required rate of return is 8%, you can start seeing your stock price drop. Trucks, let's get past. There's financial services. So you can see each segment's broken out. Revenues, revenue by product, income before taxes, income taxes. You might want to know that on page 37, it says what the effective tax rate is. Because think about all the calculations that we do. How often is tax rate a component? Almost all the time. Almost every capital budgeting problem has tax rate as a component because it's 1 minus the tax rate. Almost every interest financing has tax rate as a component. So the income taxes piece tells you what the effective tax rate is. You can calculate it too if you want, but it tells you right here. As a matter of fact, there might even be a question on the final that says, on what page can you find the effective tax rate? Because it's so germane to every calculation, and it's given right to you that you probably should go find that. So page 37 might be one that I would have tabbed and pay attention to. And it talks about why the effective tax rate has changed. This again goes into truck delivery volumes. You've got a lot of segment reporting, parts, financial services. Liquidity and capital resources, cash and cash equivalent, marketable debt securities. might be important for calculating ratios. It's back here on 45, cash flow statement. Find things like depreciation. Commitments, when borrowings are due, interest payments on the debt, operating leases. It's back here on 48. That's going to be helpful when you're calculating total debt ratios, especially if you're looking at in the future total debt ratios. So that's a lot of small stuff. 52 gets you to the meat. Consolidated income statement. This is where your meat and potatoes are going to come from. In a lot of cases, if you're looking at the company as a whole, this breaks out stuff for trucks, parts, and financial services separately. Don't get tripped up and forget to add the two together if you're looking at the company as a whole. I've had a number of folks do these problems where they just calculated it off of this, or they picked up this and they said, oh, that's the revenue. No. The revenue amount is up here. You need to add financial services revenue to come up with a 17 million and change of total revenue that you get for the organization. Some of these things could be confusing to read because of the segment reporting, because each segment gets reported separately. So just pay attention to your segment reporting when you got total revenue. What's your expenses here? Roughly. 13 million. Right? You got 15 million of revenue, 14 million. 15 million in revenue, 1.9 million in net before income taxes, EBITDA. So you got 14 million here, you got 1.1, 14, so it's 15.9 million of revenue, 14 million of direct costs to get a operating margin of 1.9 million. Then you add in financial services, then you subtract out these components, get you, this is your financial services income before income taxes, and then you've got investment income, total income before income taxes of 2.3. Each one of these breaks out separately. So you've got a financial services piece, you've got a trucks piece, and you've got investment income piece. Each one breaks out separately to net income. You have to almost do a separate income statement for each segment and add them together if you're going to look at the total company.
I thought you said it was just the top two.
Well, yeah, there's the investment income piece. So you've got two trucks, financial services, and then there's this little tiny investment income piece of 21.8 to get to your total. You only have two segments, this segment and this segment, but then there's this single line for 21.8 million. That makes sense?
No.
Okay.
I thought you said before to get total revenue, we were adding the 15.9 plus the 1,100.
Yeah, plus this,
Yeah.
that's your operating revenue.
Okay.
Your operating revenue lines.
You take off the expenses.
Expenses, they're broken out here, 809. They're not broken out here, 14 million. You've got investment income of 21.8, and that'll get you the foot to 2.337 million, or 2.337 billion, excuse me. You still look confused.
No, I'm good now.
Okay. Yeah, there's 21 million bucks of miscellaneous budget dust. And you've got your earnings per share and weighted average shares outstanding. And you've got your balance sheet. Oh, excuse me, this is consolidated balance sheet, trade receivables, debt securities, operating leases. Notice that this is also segment broken out. So cash and cash equivalents. There's both the footnote prior where it takes it all and consolidates it. And then here you've got it broken out by segment: trucks, financial services, your liabilities, trucks, financial services, stockholders' equity.
Oh, that's what the investment income comes from, right?
Investment income is going to be in the other segment. I mean, total assets, and I'm not sure where the investments are sitting on the finance and other receivables, marketable debt securities.
Should be in equity, right, or not?
No. So that what you're looking at when we're looking at up here, investment income, that is likely coming from on the balance sheet marketable debt securities. All right, so you got bonds here spinning off marketable debt securities. I'm going to go look back at the income statement for trucks since that's where it rolled up. I don't see anything broken out in trucks. It says net sales and revenue, so I don't see anything for investment income. So I'm going to assume that the two of those are related, but I'm not 100% sure. And that's could be one of the questions. It's not a question on the final, but when I'm looking at it, the income statement side of this, that 21.8 is down there, is likely related to on the balance sheet marketable debt securities that are shown trucks, parts, and other. It's other. On the equity side, this is the money that they're paying out. So you've got a combination of commercial paper and bank loans, term notes, which is going to be essentially the equivalent of bonds in their particular case. You've got a dividend that's been declared and payable, deferred revenues and residual value guarantees, which are going to be on leases. And then you've got preferred stock. How much of that's been issued? How much preferred stock's issued? How much is authorized? Okay, that's good to know. And then you've got common stock issued and authorized are different. $1 par value, additional paid in capital. Treasury stock, what's treasury stock?
That's stock you buy back.
Stock you've bought back. There's no treasury stock left. They've retired it or sold it. We've got accumulated other comprehensive loss. That comes from other comprehensive income, which is driven around foreign currency translation. You're going to be fine there. Statement of cash flows. Statement of cash flows is going to be a spot where you're going to pick up interesting non-cash things like depreciation, amortization, investing activities, financing leases, and other stuff. Changes in equity. Let me walk you through. And so here's all the footnotes. You'll find more information on the footnotes. Let me walk you through a couple. Let me give you a little insight into the final exam. Please note, put your final answers in a box. At the end of the final, you're going to hand me these sheets. I want your answers in a box. You can write whatever you want. I want the answer in a box. You're going to give me these sheets, and I'll have them printed out for you. It's going to be things like, what's the effective rate for PACCAR? Assuming, and you're going to get most of this, PACCAR's beta of 1.23, risk-free rate of 3%, market rate of 9%, required rate of return. It's a higher or lower than the equity as a market as a whole. Why? If you know CAPM, you're going to be able to answer that question without a calculation. You've got things like adding trucks, parts, and other to financial services liabilities. What are the balances of accounts payable, residual value of guarantees, other liabilities, term paper, notes? Using the data and the answers to 1 through 5 above, give a weighted average cost of capital to the nearest 1/10% where I allocate pre-tax cost of all liabilities except for commercial paper and bank loans is 0. Pre-tax cost of 5.5 is 1%. Pre-tax cost of 5.6 is 5.6. Oh, I gotta take a look at my numbering. Good, I'm glad we're reviewing it together. Should be 5.4 and 5.5. You will be taking those and allocating it back, determining based upon the balances what the weighted averages are, coming up with a weighted average cost of capital for PACCAR. And then there's extra credit on the final. So not only do you have extra credit before the final, but you got extra credit on the final. On what page can you find the answer to 6.2 and 6.3 in a PACCAR annual report? And what's the actual value for 6.2? Take note. Question 1 is worth 30 points. There's a lot of sections. There's a lot of questions. Take note. Question 2 is 25 points. PACCAR's looking at a huge flipping truck or a big flipping truck. Which one should it do? This is a classic. What? What's this problem look like? It's a capital budgeting problem to me. Using the answer to question 1, part 6. So you're going, oh shit, excuse me, oh crap, now I've got to start tying these things together. So question 1, part 6 was, what's the weighted average cost of capital for PACCAR? 15 points. So by the way, of that first question of 30 points, half the value is in question 6. This is why I keep saying, show all your work. Do your Excel spreadsheet, send your Excel spreadsheet to me. Because if you screwed up the balances here, you're going to get this number wrong. You're going to get the next number wrong. You're going to get next number wrong because we go back to this weighted average cost of capital. But if the only thing you did was calculate that weighted average cost of capital wrong, then you use it right for the rest of it, and you send your spreadsheet to me and show your work, you get full credit. I go, yeah, you miscalculated weighted average cost of capital. Everything else is fine. If you don't do anything but just give me the sheet with the box and you don't show your work, I can't. All I have is wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, and I don't know how you got the wrong answer. So note that there's a connection here between question 1, part 6. Question 1, part 6 actually ties to question 1, part 5, which ties to question 1, part 4. So you get to calculate for big frickin' truck and huge frickin' truck, the NPV, IRR, modified internal rate of return, and payback calculation for each one of those. If they're mutually exclusive, which projects do you select? If they're independent, which projects do you select? That's a classic capital budgeting problem. If you're uncomfortable with capital budgeting, a full quarter of the final exam is a capital budgeting problem. Spend some time on capital budgeting. And that you don't even have to look at the darn PACCAR statements, because if you miscalculated the weighted average cost of capital and you put it was 12% for that question and then you float it through, you'll still get full credit on this piece. So I would make sure, here's how I would do it. I would do this one first, and I would plug in a weighted average cost of capital of whatever percent. So that way I know I'm going to get a good answer for this, because I don't need to dig through spreadsheet, or I don't need to dig through financial statements. I don't need to dig through crap. Then I would do a separate tab on my Excel spreadsheet. I do a separate tab for each one of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On tab 2, I'd put this capital budgeting problem together. On tab 1, I would do all the answers to this. And then I would link the answer to number 6 over to the weighted average cost of capital. I would link over the answer to number 6 in the formula, question 2. And then when I update, then I can see where you got the answer. And then when you update the question 6 on, or part 6 on question 1, it's going to flow through. If you never get back to it, all you did was have a tab that said question 1, 6, 10%. I'm going to assume you calculated that wrong. You might get a 0 for that 15 points, but you'll get full credit for the 25 that are sitting on the next tab. Follow? Clear as mud? Clear as mud. Question 3, 20 points. Notice this isn't sending you into financial statements again. It just bought a new axle bender. There's your makers tables. Using PACCAR's marginal tax rate from question 1, part 1. What are the annual supplemental additional operating cash flows attributed to the machine for each of the next 4 years? For the axle bender, using PACCAR's weighted average cost of capital from question 1, part 6 again. Compute MPV, IRR, MIRR, and payback. So now you're doing the same thing over again. You just had to, you've got a capital budgeting problem as it pertains to this axle bender. The axle bender is $1 million to buy, $250,000 to ship, and $150,000 to install. That's all you've got for question 3. So you basically now have, holy crap, 2 capital budgeting problems. I didn't even make you look up the makers tables. I gave it to you. Okay, question 4. Question 4. If I were you, I would save question 4 till last. And here's why. Question 4 has 5 parts with multiple subparts. How many points is question 4 worth? 5 points. You can really get bogged down trying to find this stuff. And notice you haven't had anything refer to question 4, number 6, or question 4, number 5. And so I would save question 4 till last, knowing that this is a long final and this is a relatively short question, or a relatively long question with relatively low points. Make sense? Question 5. Question 5 is the one I would probably start with. Amazingly, question 5 might be damn useful if you did the extra credit. Read question 5. Read the extra credit assignment. They look awful darn similar. So I would take a look at, as a matter of fact, they look very similar to some of the discussion we had this evening. So I would take a look at question 5 first. I would do the extra credit. I would then get into question 5, and I would write for probably, knowing you've got a 4-hour final, I'd write for no more than 30 to 35 minutes. And I would have sitting next to me, since it's open book, open notes, open internet, my extra credit assignment. And I would translate as much of that extra credit assignment as makes sense, plus a bunch of additional stuff that this is asking for, into question 5, and I'd start there. Because what that'll do, folks, is that'll at least get you confident that you're on the right track. You didn't blow this entire final up. You're going, okay, I'm at least at 20 points because I've got that part done and I feel pretty good about it. And I've dug into the financials. I've looked at the management discussion and analysis. I feel pretty good about where I'm at on the MD&A. I feel pretty good about this extra credit problem because he pounded on the desk and told me to do it, even though if you guys are like my other class, only one of you will. And then you're going, okay, now I feel okay. Now I'd skip back up to question number 1 or 2. If it was me, I'd probably go to 2 first. But otherwise, if you're feeling pretty good, I'd go to number 1 and I would go, okay, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to get to number 5 and I'm going to get to number 6 and I'm going to figure out what that number 6 is because I use that twice or 3 times. I use that in question 2, 3. And then I want to make sure I've got a pretty good pin on that weighted average cost of capital. So I'm going to put a little bit of extra time into making sure I understand what that number is. Then I'm going to work through the balance of, once I get an answer to 6, I'm going to work through questions 2 and 3 because they're very similar. You got 2 capital budgeting questions. Then I'm going to make sure I tighten up number 1. And if I have any time left, I'm going to move on to number 4. And that's how I'd attack this final. And it's a long final, but if you work it the way I just described it, where you kind of get yourself off on a glide path by getting a head start on a 5th question and getting yourself familiar with the company and familiar with the issues, and then you get yourself comfortable with the weighted average cost of capital, and you study the area where I'd be studying is capital budgeting because you got 2 capital budgeting questions, you're going to be in good shape. You'll be just fine. If you're bogged down on capital budgeting and you're not comfortable there, I'd spend the next week working capital budgeting problems. I would build out capital budgeting templates in Excel before I walk in the door so that I've got something that goes, okay, given a set of cash flows, this set of cash flows calculates for me already MPV, IRR, modified internal rate of return, and payback. Oh, good. I've got it. All I got to do is drop the cash flows in, and this thing just starts barfing out those numbers because you know you're going to get asked those things twice, 3 times. Yes, ma'am.
You were running through the Packer.
Yep.
It was like 98 pages.
Yep.
Right?
90 pages of fun.
We pretty much got to like 58 through, I think that, or 59 or something.
Yep.
Is there anything past that that's going to be important to us?
Critically important, no. What you've got, some of these footnotes, Maria, are useful, but not critical.
Will it be useful to the extra credit assignment?
Yes.
Okay.
And a management discussion analysis is as well. You're going to find things in here. It basically takes, so here's how these footnotes work. Should have gotten this in accounting, but I don't know if they actually cover it in accounting. Each line item on a balance sheet and income statement essentially has a corresponding footnote disclosure in all the notes. So if you're getting a question around PACCAR's debt, you spin down here and sometimes in a set of audited financials, you'll see this thing say, proceeds from term debt, see note 17. If you go back here, there's no numbers on the notes, but essentially each note back here, each segment has here's inventories. Inventories are on the LIFO method. Cost of inventories is on FIFO method in Europe and FIFO or LIFO in the US. Not that that's going to be important, your accounting pronouncements, but then you start getting into there's the marketable debt securities that we're talking about and when they mature. If there was anything related to that, question related to that, you could dig in. The charge-offs and losses on loans. So now you're going through the asset side of the balance sheet. And they're going, okay, here's each of the assets that we have, and here's the reserves associated with it. How much is that is performing? How much is at risk? So this is all around the finance piece. Property, plant, and equipment. How long do they depreciate? How much is in each bucket? Accounts payable. So there's some disclosure amounts in here, and this is actually, oh my God, you can see what the effective, so you've got some answers in here. For instance, like the effective rate on the term notes, the effective rate on the bank line or the commercial paper. And you remember at the end of like question 1, I said, what's the actual rate? What page can it be found on? What's the actual rate? What page can it be found on? You'll find some of that back here as it kind of lines back to each of those segments. You can get through questions 2 and 3 without it. As a matter of fact, you can get through question 2 without it. This is the extra credit piece. That's on 71. So yeah, there's useful information back there, but it's actually not, it's not going to make or break you if you don't dive back into all these footnotes. It may make you, it may help the process through, but it's not going to break you if you can't find the stuff back there. The biggest challenge you've got is it's 4-hour block. It's 98 pages of stuff, and you only need about 3 pages or 4 pages worth of that data. So some of this is really going, okay, do I know where to look? Balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flows. What disclosure do I look at? And that's where most of the folks got bogged down in the last class. It's not in the math. It's in finding the pieces to do the math. And so that's why I said, if you do that analysis piece up front, and you recognize that you can do two-thirds of the points on the final, or half the points on the final, you can do essentially without anything coming off of here, as long as you make some assumptions and document the assumptions. Weighted average cost of capital is this, and tax rate is that. Even if you couldn't find the right effective tax rate, you're going to be able to then get through the final okay, especially once the curve's applied. The final exam is very similar to what you'll run into in reality. This is typical finance stuff. What you've been doing right along is like a segment where it's spoon-fed, the data is spoon-fed to you. This, normally it's not. Normally it is this big amalgam of crap, and you're trying to find, okay, I need this nugget, and I need this nugget, and I need this nugget. And my biggest criticism of myself is we don't have enough time in the class to teach you how to read the nuggets. And I'm handing you a big, 200 or 100 pages and going, okay, you got to find 50 pieces of information within this 100 pages. Go. So I wanted to take a little bit of time tonight and go, here's some crumbs to kind of run down, or at least follow, to try and find some of these 50 pages in this 100 pages of fun. Here's some crumbs to look for, because you're going to need weighted average cost of capital. You're going to need effective tax rate. And with weighted average cost of capital and effective tax rate, you're going to be able to get to good answers. And so I spend some time trying to figure out how to get those two things calculated. And if you tie those into the extra credit, you'll be a long way down the road of that. What questions do you guys have?
No, you're good if you want to go.
No, I have to find, it's on my computer now. It's saved and I can turn it on.
You have the Excel video up on the NPV, IRR, and stuff like that to have the equations.
Uh-huh.
Okay, just wanted to double check.
That's the, where it goes to highline one?
Yep. Yep. And they're set for Excel 2010. They're not that much different depending on, the version. The formulas are pretty much the same. Where you find them in a written bar might be a little bit different.
And we're doing like everything else besides talking to each other, right?
Yep. If you guys have questions on the quizzes, on the midterm, and since you got a little bit more time, fire away. Biggest problem is, of course, if you decide that you're going to crack that thing back open to go from a 87 to a 95, you got to redo the whole darn thing. So I recognize that that's kind of a pain in the neck, and you might just want to sit still on many of those. But
yeah, I started that last quiz, and then I didn't realize after about 2.5 hours into it, I was like, oh man, there's 50 questions on this one. I got 33. The last quiz is one to do tomorrow night. Oh man, that was a easy. 4 hours into it, and I got 80 on that one. I had to get it again, so another 4 hours tomorrow night. Yeah.
When you guys do the quizzes, and I get, and again, I've said this, I get more time with the Lacey students. So I spend, 3 to 5 minutes of class just kind of walking through okay, if I were doing this is how I would approach it. When you guys do the quizzes, do you build an Excel spreadsheet and just continue to add the tabs? Or do you go, okay, I'm just going to slam this thing out, and then I'm going to slam the thing out, I'm going to slam the thing out? Or do you go, okay, here's the question, you set up the question, answer it, and then move to the next tab, and set up the question, answer it, move to the next tab, set up the question, answer it, move to the next tab. So you've got them, like all the Excel tabs are kind of linked across the bottom.
You talk about the ones with the math problems, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, the ones where you've got the math problems and you're kind of going, okay, let me kind of run across the, so I got, I've got a quiz and it's, question 22, and then I build out, for chapter 1, and then I build out the question, and then because the reason I ask is twofold. One, and again, I recognize that we're kind of at the 11th hour, so it's helping my Lacey folks a lot more than you guys at this point. But one, these problems, as you probably can tell, are it's like any math class where it's the same darn problem just said in 5 different ways. And so once you build it once, you can just rinse and repeat. The other reason, though, is for the reason that you just noted, which is when you're retaking the tests, if you set it up with my variables or this, you can quickly kind of scan through and go, okay, that's, the order changes, okay, that's that same question because it's got a block of questions that it's going to ask you out of. And then you can just go back and fire in the answers. Now, I'm empathizing with a 4-hour retake where I'm like, yeah, you probably only need to look at 15 to 28% or 30% of the questions, because the other 70%, 60 to 70% you already did. If you saved those, you'd be able to just kind of you wouldn't have to redo all the work.
My solution was the way where you go back.
Well, right, because once you say question 1 and you answer it, and then by question 20, you realize that question 1, you can't go back and
You can't go back and change number 1 there.
yeah, before you submit the. I don't know too. Yeah.
That's, would you press continue?
No. It's the upside is you're not timed on it. So you can set it aside, come back, pick it up, and do it. So that's the upside. The downside is, once you've submitted, you've submitted.
Yeah, that helps a lot for me. A lot of tests have time limits on the little time right there, and it tells you have 15 minutes left, and it just interrupts you, and it makes it worse.
Yeah, we tried to design the course so that if you're a person who feels test anxiety or time anxiety, a major portion of the grade is not going to be impacted by it. The final, you're going to feel it, but you won't have felt it necessarily through the rest of the course. Conversely, if you're somebody who tests really well and works well under pressure, you've got a couple opportunities to kind of force yourself into that mode. But it's you also have things like the extra credits and class participation and the kind of take it as you go, roll through the quizzes at your own speed 6 times if you want, to be able to So if if you operate best in that environment, you got a chance to make a good grade. If you operate best in the time pressure environment, you can force yourself into the time pressure environment for those, and you've got a final. So you should be able to do okay in the class regardless of your style. What other questions?
Oh, this is actually a question. Should we get like restroom breaks or something?
Oh, yeah.
Ours is a long time, so.
Yeah, no, so because it's open everything,
Yeah,
except open chatter,
right.
yeah, you can bring food, you can bring drinks, you get restroom breaks, you want to stand up and walk around, you want to go outside for a smoke, I don't really care, just come back inside and finish your test. It's a 4-hour block. So, you know, I'm not gonna be running around like a little hall monitor and doing that kind of stuff. You all are adults and this is you're paying for your own education. So I want to make sure that you're getting a good block of time, but I'm not gonna treat you like kids.
No, I had, I was reading, any questions, I had like 8 questions. I put them on a way back. Come here, I can figure out. And usually the auto saves. Apparently, that's it.
Oh,
So, whatever my 8 questions were, I'm sure when I retake this test, they'll still be there, so.
and just drop me a line. So that's the other thing is you guys have, like I said, you've got until tomorrow night to finish up any of the quizzes that are undone. You got until Friday night to finish up the midterm. If you run into any questions, and it's not just the obvious, like, please give me the answer, boss. Don't hesitate to fire them off to me. I'm normally, as most of you know, I'm normally on email darn near 24/7. And you fire me off a question, and I generally can get back to you normally within the hour. Depending on what meeting I'm in and whether I actually need to sit down and run through the question myself. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. The other one is if you are getting stressed out or you've got something critical and you need to get it in by Friday, don't hesitate to set an appointment with me and, we can sit down on Lacey. I'm kind of tied down to Lacey for the rest of the week, but I don't have a problem working with you guys to try and get this stuff done. You guys are paying good money for good education. I want to make sure you're getting your money for it. So we'll get you through the class without a doubt. And some of you are really busting your tail to try and get through it. And I recognize, this is not an easy course. And all I'm asking is, put in the effort. Don't panic. I realize it feels like you can panic. Don't panic. You'll be fine. You'll get through it. But you got to just block and tackle for the next couple weeks. If you run into a technical problem in the next 48 hours, let me know. If you run into a glitch, let me know. I'm, again, trying to make sure you got the time as much as anything. So we did push out, thanks to a couple of your colleagues, pushed out the finish dates for some of these back a couple of days to a couple of weeks. Any other questions? Like I said, if I'm you guys, I'm starting work on extra credit number 1 right now. And I'm building a couple capital budgeting spreadsheets and making sure I'm comfortable with capital budgeting. And what you're going to find is that capital budgeting piece, the questions that are worth 20, 20, and 30 points, the first 3 questions are the ones that you're going to get actually all but number 4, are ones that you do with, that's real world stuff. Capital budgeting stuff is things that you should know because you'll run into it every day. Or at least in my world, I run into it every day. The 5th question is one you'll run into in the real world all the time. So should you invest in something, why or why not? That's just good homework. other questions? Concerns? You'll do fine. Deep providing fears. No deep providing fears. So like I said, next week, here's how things will roll. I'll get here probably, I normally get here about 4:30. However, I normally stop downstairs in the office and discuss whatever the latest and greatest issues are with my colleagues. If you get here early and want to get started early, come down by the office. You'll probably find me there, and I will hand you the final, and you can get started early. I'll be up here right about 5 o'clock. So if you get here early and you want to get started, come grab the final off of me, even if I'm not done.
Can I come down like to Lacey around noon?
No, that's a little early.
That's a little early. I'll give you the lead on a half an hour, but not noon. So once you're in the building and I'm in the building, you can pick up the final and get started. We will run through until 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, I'm going to hard cut you off. What I'm expecting will happen, so, again, I'll kind of walk back through the timeline. We'll get started officially at 5. I'm going to hand out the papers to everybody at 5, unless you pick them up for me earlier downstairs. It's open book, open notes, open internet, open everything except open mouth. And we're going to run through until 9 o'clock. During that 4-hour block, you guys are welcome to use what you can. If you've got, like I've told folks, I'm like, I don't know, internet here is spotty if you have access at all. So make sure you've got a hotspot if you need it, or your phone if you need it to be able to access the interwebs. I would pull down that PACCAR annual report to your desktop so that you've got it ready to go, because I ain't handing it out. I would make sure you've got at least 1 or 2 pens or pencils, because you're going to need to write on the little white piece of papers that I hand you. Here's the answer, and put it in the block. You'll go through that 4-hour block. You're going to answer each question. I would answer number 5, then 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, 2, 3, 1, 4. I would do 4 last. Before the final, I would have done extra credit number 1. As we wrap up the final, the hard stop's going to be at 9. What I did last time at hard stop at 9 was I wandered myself out into the lobby, and I sat down at the little round table out there and had folks just kind of come out. So I didn't come in and start yelling pencils down and stuff like that. But by about 7 minutes after 9, I'm leaving, because I'm old and I want to go to bed. So y'all can come out and hand me your sheets. For each answer, you should have it labeled. This is question 1, 2A, and then circle or label and circle box in your answer. When you get home, unless you have an internet connection that you're comfortable with, when you get home, and no later than close of business Tuesday, email me your spreadsheets that you use to do all the work for the final. I would do question 1, question 2, question 3, etc. across the bottom. And then I'd put all of my stuff for question 1, and I'd go question 1A, or question 1, 1.1, 1.2. And I would go through that process, and I'd put all the question 1s on one sheet, and I would set it up so that it's easy for the grader to be able to grade. Email me this sheet. by close of business Tuesday. I will take them, that sheet of paper that you handed back to me Monday night. I will take the Excel spreadsheets or spreadsheet that you email me Tuesday or Monday night, and I will be grading them starting Wednesday morning or Tuesday night, depending on how late I get done, through Sunday. If you didn't do extra credit number 2 and you're not feeling particularly good about your final, you have until Friday of that week to get me extra credit number 2. If you hear from me on Wednesday, because I'm going to take, here's how I grade. I'm going to take the folks' quizzes, so your quiz averages and your midterm average, and I'm going to come up with your preliminary grade before I grade your final. I'm then going to start grading the lowest grades first, because that's going to establish the curve, first off. And if it doesn't look good, I'm going to drop you an email going, you may want to take the next day or so and pound me out extra credit number 2. So if you hear from me on Wednesday or Thursday and I'm tell you, you may want to consider doing extra credit number 2, you might want to consider doing extra credit number 2. Because I'll grade you, I'm going to grade the lowest averages first.
Yeah.
And then,
I'm gonna do the extra fee just on each principle.
and then on Saturday, or certainly by noon on Sunday, I'll have posted all the grades up to Moodle. I'll have posted all the grades up to self-serve. I will post as I go. So if you're morbid about wanting to know what your grade is and you get all excited and want to check in Moodle every couple hours starting Wednesday at noon to see where your grades are, you could go ahead and do that. Because I'll start putting them in as soon as they're done. It's a relatively small section. I've only got 7 to go. So it's not going to take me that long to get through them. It takes about 2 hours a person to grade. And that some of them go really quick because all the answers are right, and some of them don't. But I figure 2 hours a piece, so that should get me done by Friday night. But I'm going to give myself the weekend. If it looks like you're in trouble, I'll let you know. I will come up with some answer to make sure we get you over the hump. I'm not going to let any of you fail if you work with me to make sure you get the work done. If you don't, then you've done it to yourself. You've had plenty of opportunities. So what you should see from a timeline starting from tonight is I would be working extra credit number 1 and I'd be working capital budget. Those 2 things would be where I'm focusing my effort for the next week. I would then, and I'd print out my packet of stuff. I'd get here about 4:30, I'd wander into the office, I'd grab the test, give yourself a little bit more time. I would review the video of this class because the test is up there and this was pointed up there and you might be able to actually look at it, unless you're Maria, in which case you took pictures of it. And you might be able to bribe her for some pictures. But otherwise, you're essentially going to be looking at getting all that information ready to go between now and next week. I hit the ground 4:30, I grab that paper, I get up here and get start working. I relax because you're going to pass. If you're here and you're working and you're putting the 4 hours in and you did what we talked about, you're going to pass. Start with question 5. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. For question 5, 2, 3, 1, 4. Turn it in. Have a beer. Get up the next morning. Email me your spreadsheet. Wait for Wednesday. If you haven't heard from me by Thursday, you know you're in pretty good shape because I haven't said go do the extra credit. And then on Friday, so Thursday you could probably go out to happy hour knowing you pass the class. On Friday, you know damn well you pass the class because I'll bet you I've got everybody graded. And if not, you'll have it by Saturday night or Sunday morning. I will let you know if there's a problem. I anticipate y'all will do fine. next semester, if you haven't taken courses yet, or you don't know what courses to take, I'm going to recommend to y'all Dr. Moore's BA 311 if you got to take it. Well, he's an incredible professor. He's incredibly knowledgeable. He was a tenured professor here at St. Martin's, left to go work for the Economic Development Council of Thurston County and still teaches for us. So he's an economist, and he is a brilliant guy, and he is funny, he's engaging, he's better looking than I am, and gosh darn it, he's a good professor as a required course. So if you don't know what to take next semester and you're kind of going, oh, should I do this, should I do that? If you have to take BA 311, I think everybody does, it's a required course, or has been. It's a blended online format like this. It's easier than this course by a long shot, and Molly's a great professor. So if you need recommendation on it, that's the one that I'm going to recommend to y'all for next session. He's awesome, and it ties into a lot of what you studied here: interest rates and interest rate risk and analysis. And so it also doesn't provide a huge gap between some of the stuff you learned here and the actual application of it in macroeconomic theory, because that's money and banking. So my recommendation is, if you don't know what to take next semester or next quarter, that's a good choice. And so you can get yourself signed up for that while you're waiting for your grades here. This is a prereq, I think, for 300 is a prereq for 311, because you're going to pass. So you can go ahead and sign up. Unless you're not going to pass, in which case I wouldn't sign for it.
I think told on your his
311? Okay, yeah, he's good.
I've had him before on Maine when we still teaching on Maine for economics. Yeah, 2 economics classes. Yeah.
Like him?
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
a lot.
he's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
So what other questions can I answer? Because I'll just sit up here and talk all night. I can let you go. But I want to make sure you guys are getting your tuition dollars worth. The other thing we will have, and you'll get an email from me as well as a reminder, is next week you'll have course evaluations on this course. You'll get those. I'm certain I'll be picking those up as well. The worst thing to do is give a course evaluation on the night of the final exam when the final exam is a hard final. This sucks. So I will make sure to get those to you. I'd appreciate you getting them back. I'll appoint one of you can volunteer to get them down to the office down below, or maybe Maria, since you're on Main, also tell you, or if you're at home, to get to take them up to Lale in the business office. Business school office. The other thing that I'll do is I normally will send around a link. There's a site many of you are probably familiar with called Rate My Professor. I encourage folks to rate their professors, not just me, but everybody, because at the end of the day, the only way for you to know that Dr. Moore is a really good professor and somebody you should take when he's got a required course that you need to take anyway, is for someone to tell you. And if you don't have, especially up here at JBLM, we're fortunate that we got some folks who are main campus dwellers that are interacting with us. But especially up here at JBLM, there's the only way you get to interact with other students and kind of earn a reputation of professors is through some of those third-party applications of going, okay, do they suck or not? And is this a void? Is it a go or no-go zone for that professor? And so I encourage you to not only rate me, and I have both good and bad ratings, which is fine. But I also encourage you to rate every professor that you have, so that your students can figure out, especially since it's tough to communicate, and a lot of folks are just coming in here for a class or two at a time, who they really should be taking and where you're getting your benefits. So I'm going to send out the link to that here after the final, and you guys can kind of look at doing that. And again, I would encourage you to do it for all your professors. And we use and very seriously use the data that we get from those course evaluations, as well as the comments that you all make, to improve the course. I will sit here and tell you I've already given feedback that I do not think that this blended online format for this course works well. I think it fire hoses you guys to death. And, the fact that I've got videos out there from classes that I did last year might be a saving grace, but it's a pain in the neck for everybody. For you guys, video quality is not good. And it's basically self-taught. And I don't think it serves any of y'all well. So while it might be easier to find a professor to teach one night a week instead of 2 nights a week, I don't think it serves the students well. And my recommendation was to do BA 300 in this format again. That doesn't mean they won't. But if you agree, put that on your course evaluations. If you go, no, I wish it was online all the time because sitting in class was a waste of time and I might as well just taught myself anyway, put that in the course evaluation. At the end of the day, that's how we actually learn, and we do take them seriously, how best to structure these classes. We're trying this blended online format largely because Department of Defense says we need to. So for those of you that are on military benefits, we can't do full online, otherwise you don't get your BAH. And so we go, okay, we'll do a part online, a part in class, so that you still qualify for BAH. And what that ends up doing is, I think it makes it the worst of both worlds. And so it may be better, since you got to be here anyway, to do it face to face both days and be done. And even then, this is a hard course, but I think it's damn near impossible for you guys in this format. The fact that as many of you are doing as well as you're doing is, to me, a pleasant surprise. And I'm sure as hell it's not because of the lectures you get.
Speaking of different days instead of Monday, because I think it's all 2 holidays.
Yep, we lost two classes as well. Yeah, an 8-week session with 6 classes, of which one is a final and one's the intro. So that again is just one of those things. It's like, okay, we'll have to figure that out. Anything else I can do for you all? That's fine. You know where my office is, right? Yeah. All right. And you've talked to Linda, right? Okay, good. Okay. If there's anything I can do for you, just let me know. You guys know my phone number. It's on the syllabus. You've got my email. It's on the syllabus. If you need anything, don't be shy. Most of you haven't been, and I appreciate that. We'll get through next week. We'll get through the course, and we'll be good to go.
Thank you for a wonderful semester, quarter, whatever it was. Classes.
Okay, Patrick, and then the basketball kid.